I'm Dorothy Calloway. I'm 67 years old. And on Mother's Day, my son called the restaurant to confirm my credit card was still on file, while I was somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, watching the clouds go pink beneath the wing. He didn't know I had canceled that card 3 weeks earlier. He didn't know a lot of things about me. Most of them, I had spent 41 years quietly deciding he didn't need to know. But that Sunday evening, in a private dining room in Savannah, Georgia, with 11 people seated around a linen-covered table and one empty chair at the head of it, everything I had quietly decided finally made a sound. I want to tell you how we got there. Not the dramatic version, the true one, which, as it turns out, is more dramatic than anything I could have invented. My name before I married Robert Calloway was Dorothy Mae Henshaw. I was born in Macon, Georgia in 1957, the second daughter of a woman who ironed other people's shirts for money and a man who drove a county school bus for 31 years without ever calling in sick. My parents believed in two things with equal conviction, the Lord and hard work, and they were not entirely sure there was a difference between the two. I became a registered nurse at 22. I worked labor and delivery at Colquitt Regional for 11 years, and then I moved with Robert to Savannah when his engineering firm offered him a senior position, and I transferred to Memorial Hospital, where I worked for another 19 years until I retired at 53. In those 30 years of nursing, I delivered 4,200 babies. I know, because I kept count. I wrote the number down in a small notebook I still have in my bedside drawer. Robert died in March of 2019. Pancreatic cancer, 4 months from diagnosis to the end. He was 62. He had planned to retire at 63 and take me to Portugal. We had a folder on the kitchen counter with printed brochures. Lisbon, the Algarve. A small hotel in Sintra with a view of the Atlantic. After the funeral, I put the folder in the closet on the top shelf. I couldn't look at it, but I couldn't throw it away either. We had 2 children. Marcus, our son, is 41 now. He works in commercial real estate in Charleston. He married a woman named Brianna in 2015. Brianna is 38, pretty organized, and deeply committed to the idea that her opinions are facts. Our daughter, Renee, is 38. She lives in Atlanta with her husband Craig and their 2 daughters, Lily and Sophie, who are 9 and 6. Renee is softer than Marcus, but follows his lead the way younger siblings often do. Not out of weakness, but out of a habit that formed before she knew it was a choice. For 23 years, I was the engine of every family gathering. Thanksgiving at my house, Christmas at my house, Easter, Mother's Day, the 4th of July. My house, my table, my kitchen, my money. Robert and I had hosted because we wanted to, because the house was big enough, because I genuinely loved feeding people. That was true. I want to be honest about that. For a long time, it was true. But Robert died, and the gatherings kept happening. And slowly, without any formal conversation, the nature of the arrangement shifted. I was no longer the woman who chose to host. I was the woman who was expected to. There is a difference between those two things. It took me a long time to feel it clearly. Grief will dull your edges for a while, and then one day, they come back sharp. The first sign came on a Tuesday in February, 14 months before Mother's Day. I was in my kitchen making a grocery list when Marcus called. He didn't say hello the way he used to. The warm, genuine hello of a boy who had once fallen asleep on my shoulder during a long drive to Hilton Head. He said, "Mom, quick question." That was how he opened conversations now. Quick question. As if time spent talking to me required a disclaimer. He wanted to confirm that I was covering Mother's Day dinner again this year. Not asking. Confirming. I said, "What are you thinking?" He said Brianna had already looked into a new restaurant on Broughton Street. 16 people. Private room. He mentioned a price range with the same casual tone a person uses when they're describing someone else's money. I said, "That sounds lovely, Marcus. Let me think about it." He said, "Great. I'll tell Brianna you're in." I had not said I was in, but I held the phone for a moment after he hung up and understood that the distinction didn't matter to him. My agreement had become a formality, a rubber stamp on a decision already made. That night, I sat at the kitchen table where Robert and I had eaten thousands of meals together, and I thought about the word confirmation, how it implies something has already been settled, how it leaves no actual room for no. I poured myself a small glass of sweet tea and I made a list. Not a grocery list. A different kind of list. I wrote down every family dinner I had paid for in the 5 years since Robert died. Every Thanksgiving turkey. Every Christmas ham. Every Mother's Day reservation. The numbers were not small. At the bottom of the list, I wrote one question. When did someone last ask me what I wanted? I folded the paper. I put it in the drawer beneath the phone charger. I went to bed. I did not sleep particularly well, but I woke up the next morning with something I hadn't felt in a long time. Clarity. The particular kind that arrives not like a lightning bolt, but like a morning, slowly, then all at once. The second sign came in April, 2 months before Mother's Day. Renee called on a Wednesday evening. She called in the careful voice she uses when she's been coached on what to say. Mom, Marcus and I were talking. We just want to make sure you're comfortable, financially. I said, I'm comfortable, sweetheart. Why? A pause. The kind that means the next sentence was rehearsed. It's just, the house is big for one person, and Brianna's cousin works with a senior living consultant. Just someone who could walk you through options. No pressure. I asked her what kind of options. Another pause. Just, communities. Nice ones. Ones where you'd have people around. I looked at the kitchen ceiling the way I used to look at it during difficult deliveries. Steady breath. Soft focus. I have people around, Renee, I said. I'll think about it. She said, Okay, Mom. We love you. I know you do, sweetheart. I hung up and sat very still for about 4 minutes. Then I picked up my phone and called the one person I had been meaning to call for 6 months. My college roommate, Patricia Owens, who had practiced estate law in Atlanta for 30 years and who was, as I have told her many times, the sharpest person I have ever known. Pat, I said when she answered, I need you to look at some things for me. She said, Finally, come Thursday. I'll make the good coffee. What Patricia and I spent that Thursday reviewing, the full trust, the property deed, Robert's accounts, my accounts, the way things were structured versus the way my children apparently imagined they were structured, is something I will come back to. Because the story isn't just what I had. The story is when I decided to use it. I want to tell you about Patricia first. We met in 1976 at Georgia State. She was pre-law. I was nursing. We were assigned to the same study table in the library and spent 3 semesters arguing about everything and agreeing on what mattered. We were bridesmaids at each other's weddings. She was in the waiting room when Marcus was born. When Robert was diagnosed, she drove 4 hours to sit with me in a waiting room at MD Anderson and didn't say a single useless word the entire time. That is the highest form of friendship I know. Not the words. The presence. Patricia had reviewed our estate documents when Robert set them up in 2011. She knew every detail. What she showed me on that Thursday in April was not a surprise to me, but seeing it laid out clearly, after the conversation with Renee, after Marcus's confirmation, it clarified something. My children did not know what they thought they knew. They had assumptions. Comfortable, unchecked assumptions about what would happen and when and to whom. I had a different plan. Robert and I had written it together in 2011 and updated it quietly in 2021, 14 months after he died, when I had finished grieving enough to think clearly. Patricia set the documents on the table. She looked at me over her glasses. Dorothy, she said, do you want to tell them or do you want them to find out? I thought about that for a long time. I looked at the rain on her office window. I want them to find out, I said. At the right moment, she smiled. Then we're going to need a plan. We spent 3 hours on that plan. It was not complicated. Good plans rarely are. But it required one thing I hadn't allowed myself in 5 years of widowhood. It required me to choose myself first, not out of anger, not out of spite. Out of the simple, clear-eyed understanding that I had earned that right 30 times over, and no one was going to offer it to me. I was going to have to take it back with both hands. The weeks between that Thursday and Mother's Day were quiet ones on the surface. I canceled the credit card Marcus had on file. I opened a separate account. I had 2 phone calls with a contact at the Savannah College of Art and Design's culinary program, an old connection through a hospital fundraising committee I'd served on for 12 years. I made a plane reservation on a Tuesday evening, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea, the Portugal brochures open beside me on the table for the first time since Robert died. Not Portugal. Not yet. But a direction. A flight with my name on it. I booked a ticket to Dublin, where my father's family had come from, where I had never been, where a cousin named Ewefe had been inviting me for 11 years through Christmas cards I had kept in a box in my closet. I wrote Ewefe a letter, a real one, on paper, and told her I was coming. She called me 3 days later, crying happy tears in an Irish accent so thick I had to ask her to slow down twice. I called Patricia. I told her the date. She said, "Good, I'll be ready." The week before Mother's Day, Marcus called again. Brief, efficient, his voice, the voice he used in business meetings. "Mom, just confirming you're still good for Sunday." Brianna reserved the Harlow room at Magnolia in Maine. 16 of us. "You know how it goes?" "I know how it goes," I said. "Card on file is the visa?" "That's the one I had," I said, which was true. It was the one I'd had. He said, "Perfect. 6 o'clock. Don't be late. The room releases at 6:15 if the party isn't complete. Don't be late." I was 67 years old, and my son was telling me not to be late to a dinner. I was paying for that. I had not chosen. "I'll be there," I said, and I would be, just not the way he meant it. Mother's Day. May, Savannah, the air already warm and jasmine sweet by 7 in the morning. I made coffee the way Robert always made it. Strong, with 1 spoon of sugar, a splash of cream. I sat on the back porch and watched the light come through the magnolia tree we had planted together in 1994 when we moved into this house. The tree was taller than the roofline now. Robert had said it would take 20 years. He had been off by 6. I went to church at 9. Not our old church, which had grown too large and too loud after the new pastor came. A smaller one, on a side street near Forsyth Park, where a woman named Reverend Grace Alston had been preaching for 30 years in a voice like warm bread. She did not know it was Mother's Day when she chose her text. Or maybe she did. Either way, she preached on the difference between service and servitude. I sat in the 3rd pew and felt something settle in my chest like a stone finding the bottom of a clear lake. After church, I stopped at the florist on Bull Street and bought myself peonies. Pink ones. The woman behind the counter asked if they were for a mother. I said yes and didn't explain. At home, I put the peonies in the blue ceramic vase Robert had bought at a market in Highlands, North Carolina on our anniversary in 2007. I took a long shower. I put on the dress I had bought in February. Cream linen, simple, the kind of dress that says nothing loudly and everything quietly. I wore the pearl drop earrings my mother had given me the year I graduated nursing school. At 4:45, I carried my travel bag to the car. My suitcase was already in the trunk. It had been there since Friday. I drove to Magnolia in Maine. I parked 2 blocks away. I walked to the restaurant, went inside, asked for the manager, a steady young woman named Courtney who knew exactly who I was because Patricia had called her on Thursday. I handed Courtney a sealed envelope and a folded card. She said, "Everything will be exactly as you described, Mrs. Calloway." I said, "Thank you, Courtney. You have my number if you need anything before 6. I walked back to my car. I drove to the airport. I sat at my gate with a novel I had been meaning to read for 2 years. I ordered a coffee from the small cart near the window. I watched the planes on the tarmac in the late afternoon light. At 5:58, my phone began to ring. Marcus. I let it go to voicemail. At 6:04, it rang again. Brianna. Voicemail. At 6:09, Renee. I answered this one. "Mom, where are you? Marcus says the table is all set and you're not here." "I'm at the airport, sweetheart." A pause that stretched like taffy. "What?" "Tell Marcus to open the envelope Courtney has at the front desk. She's been instructed to give it to the table once everyone is seated. There's also a letter inside that Captain Williams will read aloud when the check comes. Patricia has copies of everything if anyone has questions." "Mom, what is happening?" "Renee," I said, gently, the way I used to speak to first-time mothers in the delivery room who were frightened and needed someone calm to hold the room. "I love you. I'll call you when I land." I boarded at 6:22. I found my window seat. I put my bag in the overhead bin. I sat down. I watched the tarmac roll away beneath me. Somewhere below, in a cream and ivory room on Broughton Street, a woman named Courtney was walking toward a table of 16 with a sealed envelope in her hands. What happened in that room, I know because of Sophie. My 9-year-old granddaughter, Renee's oldest, who had been sitting quietly at the far end of the table drawing on her kid's menu with a crayon, and who told me the whole thing when she called from Renee's phone 3 weeks later. Children notice everything. They just don't always have the words yet. The envelope contained a single note. Marcus read it aloud because Courtney asked him to, and Marcus, whatever else he is, does not like to appear confused in public. The note said, "The reservation this evening is in the name Dorothy Calloway. The card on file has been removed. Dinner is on you. With love. Brianna," Sophie told me, made a sound like someone had taken the air out of her. Marcus said nothing for a long moment, which Sophie described as his serious face times 10. At 7:45, when the check arrived, Captain Williams, who had been briefed, who had worked in this restaurant for 14 years, and who had, it turned out, been a patient of mine at Memorial Hospital the year his youngest daughter was born, carried out the leather folio with the second sealed envelope. He opened it himself. He said, "Mrs. Calloway has asked me to read this to the table." He read it. All of it. I had taken 3 drafts and 5 days to write it, and I had read it to Patricia sitting at her kitchen table, and she had said, when I finished, simply, "Dorothy, that's everything." What the letter said was this, that I loved them, that I had loved them for 40 years of combined motherhood, with my whole body and my complete attention, the way nurses love. Practically, without sentimentality, at the cost of sleep and sometimes blood. That I had paid for 23 family dinners since Robert died, at an average I had calculated and written in the letter so that no one could dispute the arithmetic. That I had received, in that same time, 4 birthday cards that arrived late, 2 Christmases where no one asked how I was sleeping, and 1 conversation. Just one, that had been about me rather than what I could provide. That Robert and I had set up a trust in 2011, revised in 2021, and that the house on Abercorn Street was held in that trust outright, with no joint tenants, no right of survivorship to the children, and a designated remainder beneficiary that was not Marcus and was not Renee, but was instead a nursing scholarship fund at Memorial Hospital, which had been quietly accepting my annual contributions since 2020, and which would, upon my death, receive the entirety of the estate's remainder after specific individual bequests. One to Renee's daughters, Lily and Sophie, held until their 25th birthdays, and one to a young man named Darius, the son of a colleague, who wanted to be a physician and whose tuition I had been paying anonymously for 2 years. That I was not angry. That anger was not the point and had never been the point. That the point was this: somewhere between service and servitude, I had lost myself. And I had decided, quietly and without drama, to find myself again. In Dublin first, then Portugal, then wherever the road went next. That they were welcome in my life when they were ready to be present in it rather than simply adjacent to it. That I loved them. Captain Williams folded the letter. He set it on the linen. Sophie told me the room was quiet for a long time. She said Lily started to ask something, and Renee put her hand on Lily's arm gently. She said Marcus looked at the table. She said Brianna looked at Marcus. She said her grandfather, Craig, Renee's husband, a quiet man who had always been kind to me, who sent me real birthday cards with handwritten notes, put his hand briefly over Renee's. Then Sophie said, "Grandma, I drew you a picture during dinner. Can I mail it to you?" I said, "Yes. Yes, sweetheart. Please." Dublin was everything Aoife had promised. Green in a way that felt impossible. Rain that came sideways and somehow wasn't unpleasant. A kitchen in her townhouse that smelled of brown bread and turf smoke, where we sat until midnight the first night catching up on 11 years of Christmas cards compressed into conversation. I called Patricia from a bench in St. Stephen's Green on a Wednesday afternoon. The chestnut trees were just coming into leaf. A man nearby was reading a newspaper. "How are you?" Patricia asked. "I'm sitting in a park in Ireland," I said. "How do you think I am?" She laughed. "The kids called me." "I know. Marcus wants to talk." "I know that, too. What do you want to do?" I watched a bird land on the path 3 feet from my shoe. Small, brown, entirely unbothered by me. "Tell him I'm available in July," I said. "In person. At the house. Not at a restaurant." "Done," she said. "Dorothy." "Yes?" Robert would be insufferable right now. In the best possible way, I smiled at the bird. It flew away. He really would, I said. I am 67 years old. I have delivered 4,200 babies. I have worked 30 years in rooms where life and death were not metaphors, but actual, present, breathing things. I have loved a man for 38 years and buried him at 61, and I have kept his memory in a folder I finally took down from the closet shelf and opened on a park bench in a country I had never visited until I gave myself permission to go. What I know now, sitting at AYFA's kitchen table with a cup of tea and the Atlantic somewhere beyond the rooftops. A woman who has spent her life caring for others does not become less herself in the process. She becomes more. She becomes layered. She becomes deep in the way that good broth is deep, through time and heat and the willingness to stay in the pot. The mistake is in believing that because no one asks about the depth, it isn't there. My children assumed they knew me. They knew the version of me that showed up with the card, the turkey, the smile at the right moment. They did not know the woman who kept count in a small notebook, who sat with a dying man in 2011 and wrote a trust document that would survive both of them. Who had a friend like Patricia, who had been writing a letter in her head for 5 years and finally found the right room to read it in. Quiet people don't explode. They plan. And then they board a plane. And then the room fills with the sound of everything they never said out loud, finally finding the air. Marcus came to the house in Savannah in July. He came alone. He sat at the kitchen table. He did not use the phrase quick question once. We talked for 3 hours. It was not easy. Easy is not the same thing as good. Renee sent me a letter from Atlanta, a real one, paper, in an envelope, 2 weeks after Mother's Day. It was 4 pages. I read it twice. I wrote back. Sophie mailed me her drawing. A picture of a woman in a cream dress standing next to a very large tree. Beneath it, in the careful large print of a 9-year-old, Grandma, who is brave. I have it on the refrigerator here, in Dublin. Next to Oefe's grocery list and a photograph of Robert at the Cliffs of Moher taken in 1982, before I knew him, that I found in a box of his things when I was packing up his office. He is 25. He is squinting into the wind. He is smiling at whoever is holding the camera like they are the best thing he's ever seen. I think he would have liked Ireland. I think he would have ordered the brown bread and asked for the recipe and charmed whoever was standing behind the counter into giving it to him, because that is exactly what he was like. I think I'll stay until September. Then Portugal. The Algarve. The brochures are already printed. If you have ever quietly outlasted someone's underestimation of you, not with a scene, not with a speech, but with time and intention and the slow, private knowledge of your own worth, leave a single word in the comments. Just one. Patient. That's all. I'll read everyone.